So to start, I'm actually going to have each of our wonderful panelists introduce themselves, and we're going to start with Bia.
Hi everyone, I'm so happy to be here. I'm taking care of people technology data and analytics at BG Media O2. This is a UK-based company. I'm with you from London today.
Thank you, Brandy. Thank you for also moderating today's panel. My name is Ivezaj. I'm with XPO Logistics, the VP of Workforce Analytics, and I look forward to today's conversation.
Thanks, Brandy. Roberto Andrade. I am the Director of People Analytics at Meta, and I am connecting from Washington, D.C.
Thanks, Brandy. I'm Nash Becton, VP of HR Analytics at Synchrony, and I'm based out of Miami.
I'm so excited to have all of you here today. Really looking forward to our conversation. I know we had a chance to touch base earlier this week, but rather than go into some sort of long introduction, I figured we'd start right into the meat of it and get to our questions. So my first thought in thinking of this topic was really around how we build for a people analytics team when it comes to balancing technical skills, data skills, consulting skills. So if you're thinking about how you build for or hire for a people analytics team with all of that in mind, I'd love to get your thoughts. Like, what is it that you're looking for? How do you balance the advocacy and the consulting with the technical skills? And my first thought is, I'd love to throw this to Nash. Like, what do you come to the table with when you're thinking about building your team?
Thanks, Brandy. You know, it's interesting. In my experience, all of the people on our team had to do everything, right? They had to be the technical experts. They had to be the strategists. They had to be the analytical experts. But it really depends on the size of your org. In my experience, I've built orgs from the ground up, and essentially we had to do it all. But I think if you're a more mature organization, you can segment it. So you can have analysts to do the technical work. You can have strategists that come to the table with specific strategy and things like that. So I really think it just depends on the size of your org. But again, in my experience, I've worked for some great companies, and we had the task of starting from the ground up. And so we needed all hands on deck. And no matter if it was a team of two, I've even been a team of one, I had to do the analytical work as well as the technical work. So it really depends on the size, though.
What do you look for then when you have a team of two or a team of one? But it sounds like you have individuals wearing a lot of hats. Do you prioritize certain skills over others when you're starting out with a brand new people analytics team?
I just want someone to think really holistically and think down the middle. I don't want someone that's too technical. I don't want someone that's too analytical. I just need someone to think really down the middle and just think holistically about how we're going to build out the brand.
That makes a lot of sense. I know when we talked before, Daniel, you had mentioned that you tend to segment a little bit. You look for expertise in different areas to build out your team. And it's a little bit of a different approach than what Nash has described when you're talking about a smaller size team. Could you tell us a little bit about your experience in looking for these skills?
Absolutely. And I do want to add, like, exactly what Nash said is how my team started out. Right, we've undergone a long journey when we started out building the people analytics function at XPO, and when we originally started, we had to find exactly the same type of skill set and trying to balance the technical and consulting skill sets and having one holistic person do that work. Right, we started at XPO. We started with a team of like 3-4 analysts, and we built the team to where we are today, where now I'm able to segment and have specific individuals who are focused on automation, building out dashboards, working with more complex data models, versus now I also have specific individuals who are just facing off with the business, looking for data insights. And if they touched BI, they probably wouldn't even know where to start. So we've undergone that journey. But to Nash's point, which is why I like what he really said, is like, it depends on your organization, the organization itself, and where are you in that maturity, like in that journey, right? You could be at the infancy stages or you could be further along. But I think it's important to, like, as you build your team and as you build your function, to keep that in mind that long-term, it's possible to actually segregate and split those skill sets amongst different folks. Because I think to what, Nash is saying and what some of us may have experienced, is hard to find that person who is well-rounded, right? When you do find them, it's also hard to retain them. Right. So because they do want to jump onto the next big thing, or they want to really start sharpening their skills in one specific area or the other. So that's where we are currently right now. We do have a shared service function who is very strong on the data, very strong on the technical. And then we also have folks who face off with the business every day, and they're very consultative. They're looking for storytelling, data insights, and working with the business and our HR teams every day on trying to, solution problems or uncover what the right insights are for the business to make good decisions.
No, it's very well said. And that actually takes me to another question that I have in a general sense when we're thinking about skills and capabilities. I know it's important to accelerate development of capabilities, especially as the team grows and the appetite in an organization grows for people analytics type of work. I'm curious, and maybe Bia, you can speak to this. What do you think about when you're considering accelerating development for the leaders of tomorrow in this space, and what pieces are you thinking that are critical in order to build out a team so that they're not just successful today, but that they can be successful in the future?
So I think it's a fact that we have a change in the way we are working since pandemic. So pandemic has changed the paradigm about where the talent is, where is the technology as an enabler coming, and we make a jump of 5 years, maybe in 5 months, which means that suddenly the benchmark in the market has changed, and being able to have the best skills as soon as possible became something very important. And you have four ways to do this. You can build it, you can borrow it, you can buy it, and you can try to put a bot to automate that. If you want to build, and every company wants to build knowledge internally, identifying what you've got and which is the upskilling, reskilling roadmap is a key part of the jigsaw. But putting and tied to this identification, by when do you need that? And why do you need that to meet all the workforce plan and strategy and all the business decisions that your business is having in this moment, has reduced from years to months. So it's so important that we are able to set up the right skill sets and the right upgrading or upskilling paths as soon as possible, because the market is asking us to be as agile as we can be and as fast as we can be.
I love how you frame that as not just build and buy, but borrow. Could you speak a little bit to that? Like, how does that show up for you when you're thinking about borrowing talent?
The network is immense, right? It's so huge. And there's places in which when you have the right network in place, we have these alliances in which you can borrow some talent for a while, and then they can borrow some talent from you later on. Because at the end, we are all chasing the same thing. We're chasing to have the greatest teams. We're chasing to have the best and to do the best as we can. And what I have found since 2 or 3 years ago is the network really works. And borrowed talent to do some stuff is enriching the one that is picking the talent and the one that is lending the talent, because it's a great learning. So we are doing this among the company and with some other companies, because we are feeling this is a great way to grow.
I love that concept. I think that it gives you some flexibility in terms of, is this a path that you need to grow out? If it's a particular capability that you don't have, it may not necessarily be something you're looking to build long term, but perhaps in the short term meets a particular need. I just love that concept. So buy, build, or borrow. I think it's important to keep that in mind when we're thinking about building out our analytics teams. Pivoting just a little bit, I'm thinking about not just the growth of teams and being flexible and agile, but also how do we engage our partners on that front? So I actually have a question for Roberto in particular. Curious how you engage with your HRLT members when you're thinking about building a data-driven culture. Like, what are those components in those conversations to help them think about being data-driven?
Oh, that's a great question, Brandy. And this is one of my favorite areas, which is partnering with the HR leadership team. Because one of the things that I found is that in our space, like, we have the power of data and we can explain many things, but the context, the relevancy of the leaders, the way that they are thinking about, like, many of the things that are high sensitive that don't come into our models, it's quite important. So this partnership to me is one of the key elements that I have on my business. Now, having said that, and I've been in places with different stages of maturity of data literacy within the HR organization, or even vision to whether, like, data should be a core skills of HR, or if it's a skill that it's augmented by the mere existence of our function. So on that side, like one of the things that has been a constant has been working with HR to have some type of an enablement of the self-service model. So using tools like on this conference this year, how do you use that to power people to be able to access some of the more descriptive, easier reporting side of the house questions and be able to answer that? Now, as we keep going on this ladder, the next step is, when do they need to engage people analytics, and what are the things that they can answer themselves? Because it's really interesting with data, as all of you know, like there are many things that we can say with data, but there are things that we cannot say with data. Like we get the data and we're comparing a couple of rates, but we shouldn't be comparing them. And that is one of the concepts that it's hard to pass on and to get them grounded into, like, maybe this is an area that we need to partner instead of just being self-serve driven. And additionally, and this is frankly one of the areas of development and of growth that we're having, is that usually when you're thinking about people programs, impact is not always the first thing that's on the table. Like it tends to be, for those of us who work on financial services, the first thing, like when you're talking about financial services, impact and the value and the savings and what you add to the top line is one of the first considerations. In what I found is that in our side of the house, not always is as clear. So having the conversation about maybe we can set up as we're putting initiatives forward so that we have a full framework into how we're going to be measuring success as we move forward on this. And then I think when you incorporate that, that makes it like a powerful partnership and brings them a good symbiotic relationship between the two orgs.
Yeah, I do find that, really within even a single company, you're going to have people with different comfort levels, so to speak, when it comes to data and analytics. Some of them are a lot more happy to get into a dashboard and play around with it, use filters, get what they need. And others, if it's not perfectly polished into maybe a PowerPoint slide, it is almost inconsumable. And I'm curious, if you have anything to add on that, Roberto, or if others in the panel, how do you balance that when you have kind of a myriad of experiences with data and analytics within a single organization? Even, some people who are far more comfortable and others who maybe don't use it, mostly because they don't understand it. What kinds of resources do you offer, or how do you help to champion these concepts with them?
Just based on some of the experiences that I've undergone, and how do we first, one of the things that was important for my team's organization to balance that with the HR leadership team was first to understand what are some of the strategic guidelines that we had to set in place for data analytics and for HR analytics. So our first steps, our primary steps, were to standardize the way we actually did our math, right? To Roberto's point, sometimes you'd have individuals would come into the organization from their prior experiences and want to do things a specific way. That leads to inconsistencies, right? So we created a single source of truth, not just with the data, but also with the formulas and the mathematics. And once the HRLT signed off on it, it became the way forward. Now, anytime someone did come up with a better idea or a different way and outweigh the pros and cons, there would be a meeting of the minds of the HR leadership team and the HR analytics team, and we discuss it. Which way do we want to implement this new KPI? Do we want to change it? Does it make sense for the organization? So those were some of the ways that we partnered with the HR leadership team to do that, to deliver like that data-driven culture. Now, to your other point, like whether or not someone is really well tuned, or I don't want to say like the right word is mature enough, but like may not like dashboards versus PowerPoint versus Excel dashboards. Sometimes you do have to tailor your things to stakeholders, but also at the same time, it's around that hand-holding, that white glove service. Not a lot of organizations have that bandwidth or the resources, but I think it's important if you do offer one-on-one time with them to bring them up to speed or to show them how you're delivering some of your content. Whereas some stakeholders may already be using it, they love it. Some other ones may just need a little bit more, training and or some hand-holding just to get them up to that par and that speed to show them the power and how to use it.
I love that concept, Daniel. Although my first thought goes to Nash talking about being a team of one or a team of two. I don't know how you have the bandwidth to do that sometimes. Nash, could you maybe add a little bit of context? Like how have you handled that with a really small team?
That's an excellent point by Daniel. I think, education is key, but you can't educate until you're standardized and everyone is speaking the same language and marching in the same direction. So I used to just offer office hours, once a week or even bi-weekly to whoever wanted to join. I would send it out to the entire HR. And then we would just go over dashboards and reports at a very high level and just make sure that all of the, all of the stakeholders understood what the metrics are, how to define these metrics, and just making sure, again, that we're speaking the same language. So I think the education piece is key, but to Daniel's point, you really have to understand and be standardized across the board.
By the way, I'm totally taking office hours. I'm going to use that going forward.
I like that idea for sure. Having office hours might be a good way to go, at least to start if it's a small group. I want to come back to Roberto. I know that you were going to add some context for the conversation relative to juggling, where people are on that knowledge and experience curve with data and analytics.
Yes, and actually, Brandy, I think you're totally right. And I've been in environments, and one of the risks that we have of that environment is that the people that feel less comfortable with data, they prefer not to include data as part of their communications, which we've seen many, many times. So I think this is another element of partnership with leadership. I love Nash's idea of office hours or doing something that scales or having some type of an embedded model where people analytics spends a little bit of time in on-sites and off-sites and all the regular cadences that some of the teams have to try to mitigate that fear. Is not, I haven't found like a single silver bullet that kind of addresses this, but many of these techniques, when implemented on an orchestrated way, can contribute to have a more data-driven culture throughout.
I am a member of the HRLT community, so we are driving the people analytics from the business part. And we have made 3 or 4 changes when we work in partnership with other people analytics team, data analytics team in the company. So one thing is, we have told our people, good enough is good enough. So perfection is great when you have all the data you need. If you go for good enough first, then you can refine and fine tune it. Other bit that I don't know if what's happening to you also is when people is asking you for something and you cannot deliver the full thing, the first answer is, give me the raw data. I will do it by myself.
Yes.
Right? I see you smiling, right? So
yes.
we are telling people raw data by itself means nothing. So I can bury you under a ton of data and you will have still no answer for this question. So shall we work together in the question? And then we have the answer. And this is a very personal sharing, but because you're delivering plenty of stuff and then people is not using it, one thing that we are doing is a call to action. So we are doing the data, the storytelling, the hypothesis, which is your action. And I want to see the action that you're going to do with this bit. I know this is the business side of the situation, but when you are putting everything in context, suddenly this is coming part of the tool that you have on a day by day to have a stuff, and it's not a theoretical exercise that someone is giving you in a pretty dashboard that you can use. It's something you have to change, and it's something that you need to change the result, and you can measure an action what you are doing. And my only reflection about this is good enough is good enough. So move on. Everybody wants to be perfect, but we cannot be perfect, so move on.
I love that you said that. I would also add, I guess, just from my own experience, that the storytelling component's really important, even with what seems like basic reporting or something from a dashboard. I don't know if you all have experienced the same, but it's not just let me throw this over the fence because I've made you a tool and go figure it out. It's exactly to what Bia was saying. Like, there's the hypothesis, there's the data itself, and then there's some actions that should be tied to it. And I think more and more we're being challenged as analytics teams to be more business savvy, to know more about what's actually going on in our organizations beyond just the numbers we might be looking at, in order to add value to the conversation, because we run the risk of people saying, just give me the raw data, I'll figure it out. And I think we all know that that's not usually how that goes. So
yeah.
This is wonderful. I want to kind of change direction just a little bit. And Daniel, I'd actually like to start with you on this question. How has your team evolved since it was set up in terms of the skills and structure and scope? I know this is playing off of our first bit of the conversation around going from a small to a large team, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about your team's evolution.
Thank you, Brandy. It's a great question. Yeah, I'm going to piggyback off of what Nash and I were discussing earlier. And when I started off at my current organization, XPO, we started with a team of 2-3 analysts, and the skill sets of those individuals, we had to find exactly what Nash was mentioning earlier, is you have to find that well-rounded individual. And sometimes it's a needle in the haystack, right? But you had to find someone who was also moldable, right? Because the organization for us was very new to a people analytics function. So we also had to ensure that these individuals could be influenced in a way where they were not set in their own ways on like what the vision should look like. So we found senior analysts that came in, knew how to work within business intelligence, knew Excel skills, knew PowerPoint, but also were not data biased, right? They weren't just, I only want to work with HR data, I only want to work with talent acquisition data, right? They were comfortable with working different data sets because they either came from smaller organizations as well. We just expanded. We continued to expand their skill sets. More rows of data they had, it kept convincing and motivating them that's just all it means is just a little bit longer to take to run the models or run the Excel models and load it into BI. But as we continue to deliver our products to our senior leaders and deliver more hypothesis-driven analysis, we started to transform the team into looking at which stakeholders were the ones that are most important to work on and work with. So then we started to set up the team in a way where we had stakeholder-driven individuals focus on either delivering content to a specific business or to a specific function. And as we continued driving that direction, one thing that started to come to our minds was, well, how do we ensure that these folks can focus on the stakeholder and not so much as spending hours and hours on the data, the Excel, extracting information from multiple different sources? So that's where the shared service approach came in. And we set up all these different verticals within the team where we could then have someone facing up with the business, but someone partnering with each individual who's either in an offshore capacity or nearshore capacity that's very technically advanced, that could help them automate, build the reports, work on the queries. And the team slowly started transforming. The one thing I will add is as we continue to do this and transform the team, we were able to deliver more dynamic reporting. If I looked at what we delivered back when I first started at XPO in 2018 to now, we have an HRBI environment with over 230 dashboards, all dynamic in nature, across several different applications. And we're touching HR data in every single area, everything from our core system to talent acquisition to learning development, talent assessment. And now the team, what we're able to do is we're actually part of every single HR program that gets rolled out or is going to get rolled out, which is fantastic because not only do we get to be part of the conversation when we're building the program, we can also help to advise on what are the success measures that we need to track to ensure that this program is going to work or that this program is giving us the results that we want it to, which again, then all it does is create better reporting for us in the future. So now the team advises on, do we need this SharePoint database to have these specific data fields? Or is that form that employees are going to fill out, does it have the right data that we're collecting? Or is it going to answer the questions that are needed? And that's part of the journey that we've gone through. And the skill set has just changed over that time. Right now I need folks that are going to be critical thinking in those environments and who are going to be part of these larger programs and understand how HR works and how HR faces off with the business. So finding those people now has been a little more challenging because I'm like, they're not really out there. So it's like, we're also looking for these individuals who can fit these new roles that we've sort of developed.
It starts to turn into looking for a unicorn, I guess, so to speak, because you've kind of created some custom roles and opportunities. And I'd be remiss if I didn't tie this back to what Roberto had said earlier about kind of having a clear plan. Like when we're talking about driving a data-driven culture with our HRLT, you need a plan. You need to have some clarity around what are we trying to do with this information? What are our KPIs? How will we know if we're successful? And I don't know that we always do that consistently with all of our work at any organization. And I think that is probably the fundamental piece that's going to make a difference in terms of growth. I believe, Roberto, you have a pretty large team as well. Would love to hear a little bit about your team's evolution, just to kind of as a comparison point, maybe from Daniel's experience.
Yeah, it's very interesting because one of the things that I found is, even though my team is significant, one of the drivers is also the nature of the work. So one of the things that we find, and this is the part that is challenging about this, is that it is time dependent. So it depends on the stage of the company. It depends on the stage of the industry. Now that we are all navigating through these macroeconomic trends, like how's that pressure surfacing into the leaders' priorities? And what is that doing to our teams? So what that has done is that in the journey, like the amount of predicted work that we can do, like the usual one that we put on the roadmap, that's going to have like a longer time frame, tends to get compressed a little bit and gets replaced by these fire drills that are high priority, driven by executives that need to have like a very clear answer, where we're testing hypotheses in a couple of days as opposed to like a week or so. So this creates a need of a very agile culture within the team. So some of the skills that we were talking about before, like we can have our analysts being more on the consultative side with a light access to data. Maybe there's a need to expand that a little bit more. And that has happened on my team, like just pushing the analysts to get a little bit more technical, dangerous enough so that they can cover certain use cases, not to the depth that a research scientist can have. But also has pushed the research scientists to be a little bit more consultative, to understand the business a little bit more, to be able to deliver the message. Brandy, to your earlier point about the importance of storytelling, to have those storytelling skills, which are not like on our world of data and people data, it's not as straightforward. It requires a learning. So that part of the journey has also been there. And then having this ability for them to pivot from one thing to another, from one mindset, research-driven, we control all the variables, to an environment as the one that Bea was describing, where we just need to get to a place where it's like, good, we hit like all the big milestones, but not necessarily spend time on the last 10% that's going to add marginal value. But we were able to hit the big rocks. And that is a very different flavor of culture that I've seen.
Yeah, that reprioritization seems to hit everyone. Sorry, please chime in.
Yeah, so building a little bit on top of what Roberto is doing, just sharing, if someone has Googled Virgin Media O2, we are a joint venture. We are in year 2 of the merger, and we are a joint venture between Liberty Global and Telefónica. And what we have had is we have plenty of skills, no order, no structure, right? So I think we are in a different position in terms of we need to build these teams. And the first thing that we have done is we have segregated reporting from insights and analytics, because those are very different capabilities. Why? Because of the speed, as always, because we need to deliver business outcomes in month 1, month 2, month 3 on the joint venture. And for doing this, and I don't know if you have already had this experience, and this is a question for you all, we just stopped for 3 weeks. We did an assessment on tools, an assessment on products, an assessment of what we want to do. And then we built a roadmap. And we are targeting a roadmap, a plan, right? And we are targeting the skills for the plan with the right investment. This is helping the team to be developing the skills faster, because the minute they understand they can deliver a business outcome, like a people policy for the whole company, or like how can we contribute to the work smarter, live better piece of the company, the anger to learn and the anger to skill themselves is becoming like a peak, right? But before we have had to have this exercise about putting a structure, putting a scope in place, so people can work towards a target that is in the path, right? I know this is very, very specific because of the situation of the company, but it's also important because we have more than 35 different data sources, and we need more than 35 skills. And if you want to work in this environment, you need to start to put some order and to make some choices. I don't know if you have to have also to make those choices around which are the tools that you are using, which are the data sources that you are using, which are the skills that you are using to make things go faster and go better.
No, I think you're spot on. I mean, what I hear in that the core being the strategic workforce planning, and it's a little bit of what Daniel said as well. You know, you're starting to look at the landscape and say, what do I need? And then how do I grow or build or borrow from what you had shared earlier? I think that there's more we can do on that front, and it still ties in with some of what Roberto was saying on the prioritization piece. I mean, there's going to be fire drills and things that take up our time. I know within my own team, we're working with some ideas around a prioritization matrix. Can we score things that are coming in through our intake on value and complexity of the work to better determine, do we have bandwidth to do this now? Is it not now if it's in 3 months or 6 months? And, how do we manage that backlog? Because it's not like we're ever short on research questions to answer. I'm wondering though, still kind of going around this idea of skills and capability building. And Nash, I'd love to hear from you on this. Part of me, selfishly, my background being in IO psychology, I think the research experience and the behavioral understanding is important with some of this work. However, I also understand that we need those technical skills, somebody who can crunch numbers, build dashboards, and that's not necessarily going to be an IO psychologist right out of school, maybe, or might not even be any of us at all. I can't build a Power BI dashboard, I'll tell you that. But Nash, with starting with a small team, you're growing a team right now. What are you looking for first? What do you feel like you can buy, so to speak, before you start to build or maybe even borrow?
That's a great question, Brandy. I'm looking for that holistic, enterprise-wide thinker. I think we get caught up in the minutia of trying to really try to solve for the issues of today and not thinking about tomorrow. So I'm always focused on that enterprise approach to where we're adaptable, we're flexible. It's not a Band-Aid approach, right? The business pivots, so we need to be able to pivot. So to Daniel's point earlier, just someone who's able to adapt, someone who's able to, go 100 miles an hour east, and then, hey, the business says we need to go west at 200, right? And so that's just really important, as no matter what stage you are in terms of a smaller team or a big team, just someone who has that enterprise-wide thinking.
Yeah, I don't know, unless you're in a really large team, that you have the luxury of staying in your lane or being in a specific box anymore. I think that because companies are changing so much, the world's changing so much, that we're having to get people to be flexible. And I love the idea, Bia, of you outlining on a roadmap from a strategic workforce planning perspective. What are the skills that we need to accomplish these goals? Because that actually does drive some motivation. I mean, I myself might think, oh, I'd love to learn, I'll just pick on the Power BI example. Like I'd love to learn Power BI, but unless I know for sure that's a skill that we need, that I'm helping my team or my organization be successful by building that skill, it's really hard to make time for it.
And the transparency in showing which is needed at company level, and which are the skills that are attached to each of the roles that are needed, is making an attraction by itself. So you are bringing adoption of using data as a data-driven decision from people and people PLT, because they are seeing the value, but the people itself, they're seeing the value for them. So if you can give the transparency to people saying, look, I'm looking for a senior, whatever role, he has those skills, you have these skills, so you have a gap of the 20%. Those are the learnings you can take. Those are the certifications you can take. You are building with the data and analytics space a whole HR experience that will drive the move in the company, because you have this roadmap set up and this target set up.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm just really curious, if we could do like a quick show of hands, how many of you have a split between your reporting and your maybe more advanced research analytics? Do you have those teams split out? I know, Nash, you've got a new small team, so everything's together. So that's interesting from an evolution perspective, that it seems as teams grow and we have more people and more bandwidth, it seems like the evolution is we tend to split those two pieces out, maybe to free up that capability for both groups to dive further into their technical expertise. Any other reason or rationale that you all have experienced as to why those get split out?
So if I may just chime in on that one, Brandy. The team itself is not necessarily on my end split out, but there's a specific set of individuals like equal to those individuals when they're needed. If this requires a complex hypothesis, forecasting, predictive modeling, any of that nature. And the reason I don't necessarily just carve it out entirely, but more bring those individuals in and on a project, is because I don't want there to be complete segregation where they're not doing something all the time. because there isn't always a lot of that advanced analytics work that's always needed, or just the business doesn't always need it. There's never enough business questions sometimes to do that. The other piece of it is that when it comes to those individuals, and why I call upon those individuals, is because they have experienced something in a prior organization. They have a specific statistical background. They have experience doing exactly what we need them to do, but it's only about 10 to 15% of their real skill set. The rest of their skill set falls within the regular team. So that's the reason why, I have it structured that way. But again, every organization does it differently. My prior organizations, I was at financial services, they carve out that team entirely on its own. But there's enough work and content that comes from the business and comes from HR to keep them in that separate space. So for me, it's I at least make sure that I hire individuals who have that background, because based on the amount of requests we come in throughout the year, right? The HRLT, at least on my end, will at least ask 4 to 5 different critical, heavy advanced analytics items from our team. But if I was in a prior organization, it used to be 15 to 20, right? It required a slightly different carve out of the team.
Yeah, I think that does matter in terms of the type of work you have coming in as to how much that might drive a separation of the team. And really what you said resonated in the sense that I think of those, they were super popular for a while, but you saw the curve where it's like reporting's down here and up here is, AI, machine learning. And in my mind, I mostly think of that as a pyramid, and that the reporting's never going to go away. That is foundational. Our partners don't know what we're talking about if they don't understand some of the basic concepts and understand what some of these metrics are telling us before we can get to those more gritty questions. It's first, how much turnover do I have before I can get to why are people leaving, or how do I retain them? Those are seemingly related questions, but they obviously have very different approaches to answer each.
Yeah, and it's funny that you bring up that exact visual, because that's the visual I used when we first set up the team. However, I changed it a little bit. I created a a filled line chart, right? Where once we accomplish level 1, then we go to level 2 to fully accomplish it. But one of the things I kept finding is that you have to do a little bit of all the different levels at the same time. You have to at least also ensure that you have the capability to at least touch on level 3 and level 4, which is like the causation, right, regarding all of the analytics, and do some of the advanced analytics and some of the automation AI. And back to like what Via was saying, is that even though you may not even have this on the team, you may have to borrow it, right? You may have to touch on, work with IT if they have data scientists, or like you may have to buy it as well. So for example, like we don't have IO psychologists at XPO internally, but we do have IO psychologists that work with us externally as third-party partners. And every time we implement a new survey, we implement anything regarding an complex HR program, we work with that purchased talent to help us understand, did we do this correctly, right? Are there any things that you can advise us on to change our language, change the approach, right? And that's the methodology that we've been using, and it's been working quite well.
That's a great point by Daniel. I believe a lot of organizations, so if you think of the levels of reporting, if you think about operational reporting, advanced reporting, then analytics, and then predictive, everyone wants to jump straight to predictive, right? And meanwhile, the operational reporting foundation is not where it should be in terms of being mature. So you do have to, it's a balance between, hey, is our operational reporting great? And then we still want to have some level of predictive analytics, but we can't just jump to level 4 and stay in level 4 in terms of having those statistical models and things like that. So that's a great point.
Absolutely agree with that. I know we have just a couple minutes left. I want to kind of wrap up with a final question for each of you. So, dig deep to give us a little nugget of wisdom here. Basically, it's what is a rule or a guideline that you would follow when reskilling, upskilling, or outskilling talent? So what's your piece of wisdom you can give the audience relative to a rule or a guideline you follow when it comes to reskilling, upskilling, or outskilling? And we'll go in alphabetical order again. So, Bea?
For me, the sky is the limit. There's nothing that people cannot do if you give them the right motivation.
My one guideline is ensuring that you empower the team to be comfortable with change, always keeping them on the burning platform. The one thing that I think we can all take away from just even today's panel, and Brandy, thank you so much for just leading the panel, and everyone has such great insights, is that change keeps coming up as a common word. right? And being on prior reporting teams, making sure the team is comfortable with the fire drills, comfortable with the constant business direction moving, you will see that you will get more out of your team from an efficiency, optimization, and they'll also want to upskill themselves with that change. So I think having your team always comfortable change is very important.
So for me, I think the importance to have a culture of learning within the team, just having the individuals and building a team with space, with opportunities to learn. And I love what you said, Brandy, learning with a purpose. So not just learning new skills because they are out there, but because they are going to be applicable either in the short term or in the midterm, and they get a chance to exercise them at work so that they stick.
Thanks, Brandy, and thanks all. This has been a fantastic conversation. I would just say that relying on verified data and not hunches, right? So instead of HR and learning and development teams, I think they really should analyze metrics around which skills your people, already possess and where the opportunity areas exist in order to close those gaps. And you can't do that without verified data. So that's what I would say.
That is definitely true. So sky's the limit. Be comfortable with change, create a love of learning, and make sure you're using your data. I love it. That's good advice. Thanks, everyone.